Hey everyone, this is Zach with 8020 Media, here today with a video on the most common Ford 1.6 EcoBoost engine problems and reliability. Starting off on a little bit of a negative note for the Ford 1.6 EcoBoost engine, it really does not have a very good reputation for reliability. It did and still does suffer from a number of very severe, costly, time-consuming, and frustrating issues. And so, of course, when you have any problems like that that are severe and time-consuming and costly, of course, that's going to give the engine a little bit of a bad reputation for reliability, and unfortunately, that is the case for the 1.6 liter inline-4 EcoBoost engine. Let's go ahead and jump in and discuss some of the most common problems with the 1.6 EcoBoost. Number one on the list, we have coolant intrusion. So this is something that there are a number of lawsuits, a number of service bulletins from Ford, a lot of speculation and various information flying around out there, since coolant intrusion is a very serious and costly issue, as it can lead to complete engine failure. So ultimately, what happens with coolant intrusion, the speculation is that it has to do with poor mating surfaces between the engine block, the cylinder head, and the head gasket. And so ultimately that leads to coolant leaking into the combustion chambers. Often cylinders 2 and 3 are the most affected by these issues. And of course, when you do have coolant entering the cylinders and the combustion chambers, that's a recipe for disaster, as it can cause a number of different severe and costly problems with the engine. Of course, over time, even if it's just a small coolant leak, that coolant will mix with the oil and essentially dilute the oil, take away some of its lubrication, which can cause additional wear and tear and stress on the engine. If enough coolant leaks into the cylinders, then you could end up hydrolocking the engine, and otherwise, ultimately, you have coolant wiping oil off of the cylinder walls, leading to additional wear and tear on the engine there. Basically, when it comes to coolant intrusion, there are a number of things that can ultimately end up failing with the engine internally, but a lot of the times it does require a complete engine replacement and lead to issues that are too costly or too complicated to repair or fix, that it just makes more sense to go ahead and replace the entire engine. Very severe issue there. This is really the biggest thing that brings down the reliability and really the overall reputation for the 1.6 EcoBoost engine. So coolant intrusion, definitely something to be on the lookout for. Moving into another common problem for the Ford 1.6 EcoBoost, we have overheating. This ties partially into the coolant intrusion issues. So when it comes to overheating, really the biggest thing I am talking about here is there were a number of issues with 2013 to 2015 models. Ford had actually issued a recall for those years for overheating, and really what it often boils down to is it starts with low coolant. That's why it ties into the coolant intrusion issues. Obviously, as you have coolant entering the combustion chambers, you're losing coolant. The vehicle ends up becoming low on coolant, which in turn leads to overheating and could often end up cracking the cylinder head and head gasket, leading to additional leaks and more costly repairs. Something, again, that really brings down the reliability of the 1.6 EcoBoost. Now, this could be avoided in just checking coolant levels, making sure that you are always topped up on coolant, because that coolant intrusion is so common and you can end up with low coolant very quickly and very easily. So if you're not paying attention to that, you might end up running into overheating issues and problems similar to this. Now, again, the models that were seemingly most affected were the 2013 to 2015 models, as those were the years that Ford actually did issue a recall for this problem. Just as a quick side note, the 1.6 EcoBoost is getting a little older, especially earlier years of the engine. So there are, of course, a number of other issues that can cause overheating. Just to name a few, the water pump and thermostat are two possible issues that can cause overheating. Water pumps are something that on many cars, many different engines and vehicles, they just tend to start going bad after that 10-year or 100,000 mile mark. And so definitely something to be on the lookout for if you do run into overheating problems. Could certainly just be the water pump, thermostat, or something else, especially as these engines are getting older and older, and certain things that aren't necessarily issues or design flaws will naturally start popping up more and more with that extra age and wear and tear on the engines. Moving on to common problem number 3 for the Ford 1.6 EcoBoost engine, we have carbon buildup on the intake ports and intake valves. Really what this boils down to is the 1.6 EcoBoost is a direct injection engine. All engines do produce some degree of oil blow-by, which makes its way back into the intake tract and can stick to the back of intake valves and and on the walls of the intake ports. Ultimately, what happens there with direct injection, since fuel is being sprayed directly into the cylinders, there's no fuel and no detergents flowing over those intake ports and valves to actually wipe away any oil deposits, whereas on a traditional port injection car, you would have fuel and detergents being sprayed in there, which would naturally wipe away any of those oil deposits. Anyway, what ends up happening with the direct injection engine is those oil deposits sit there, they eventually start building up, hardening, and forming what's known as carbon deposits or carbon buildup. Over time, as that buildup increases and becomes more severe, it can start restricting airflow into the cylinders, which can lead to a number of performance and drivability issues like power loss, misfires, rough idling, stuttering, hesitation, etc. This is something that isn't really a serious concern. Many direct injection engines go their whole lives without being walnut blasted. It really doesn't cause any longevity or long-term reliability concerns. It's more so just the performance and drivability issues that can arise. So if you do run into that, walnut blasting the intake valves to wipe away those carbon deposits is great maintenance. It's something that we would highly recommend doing every roughly 100 to 125,000 miles. But again, it's not something that's really going to cause any major concerns for reliability or longevity of the 1.6 EcoBoost. Moving into issue number 4, we have the timing belt on the Ford 1.6 EcoBoost engine. Now, the timing belt really isn't something that's fair to call a common problem. It's actually just a standard maintenance item. Ford recommends replacing the belt every 10 years or 150,000 miles. It doesn't have any real design flaws. We haven't really seen any of these timing belts fail prematurely. However, it is something to be aware of since the 1.6 EcoBoost is an interference engine. That means there is overlap in the area that the valves and pistons travel. So if timing jumps far enough, then the valves and pistons could actually collide. So basically, if the timing belt snaps, that could be a recipe for disaster. Many modern cars and engines, especially interference engines, opt for a stronger timing chain to prevent issues like this. However, Ford did go with the timing belt on the 1.6 EcoBoost, which is actually maybe a good thing considering the 3.5 EcoBoost in its early days with the timing chain had a number of issues. So fortunately, no concerns with the 1.6 EcoBoost timing belt. Just something to be aware of and understand that is a common maintenance item and something that should certainly keep an eye on that, especially as you approach that 8-year and 100,000 plus mile ballpark. Probably good to start paying attention to that timing belt and being ready to replace it sooner than later. So really that wraps up some of the most common problems on the Ford 1.6 EcoBoost engine. Circling back to overall reliability a little bit, the 1.6 EcoBoost really has just gotten a poor reputation for reliability due to some of the severe, costly, and frustrating issues like the coolant intrusion and overheating issues that many of these engines have experienced. That's really what brings down the 1.6 EcoBoost reliability. It's not like it's an engine that is just riddled with common problems and is going to be in the shop every weekend or every other weekend. There really aren't many common issues or design flaws with this engine. It's just the case that with those few design flaws like the coolant intrusion and the cylinder block, head gasket, and cylinder head, that's just such a severe and costly issue that of course that brings down the overall reputation for the Ford 1.6 EcoBoost and reliability. Now, I don't want to say avoid this engine at all costs. However, it is an engine that you should be very cautious of if you are looking to pick up a vehicle with the 1.6 EcoBoost. Be sure that you check the maintenance history, see what's been done to the engine, see if it had any issues in the past with coolant intrusion or overheating or anything of that nature. Just things to keep in mind before you do buy a 1.6 EcoBoost, since again, these are some severe issues that can lead to complete engine failure at the most, and at the very least could lead to some very severe and costly repair bills. So something to be aware of if you are looking to pick up a 1.6 EcoBoost. Anyway, that wraps up our video for today, guys. If you appreciated the content, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the description below for more. Thanks, everyone.